I'm Tim, the Brand Weaver, and this is Branding for Breweries, the podcast that helps you grow your brewery, build a better brand, and connect with more drinkers. Each week, I'm joined by the brightest minds in the beer world, sharing practical tips to help your brewery stand out and sell more beer. Let's get stuck in. What up, 24-hour party people? 'Tis I, Tim, the Brand Weaver, and you are listening to Branding for Breweries, the show that, like the intro says, brings you the brightest, most talented people in the industry from around the world to your earballs and eyeballs to help your brewery thrive and survive. And today is no exception because I am joined by the legendary, what I like to think of as now a friend, Sarah Warman. Now, if you don't know who Sarah is, where have you been? What rock have you been living under? But Sarah worked for a little brewery called BrewDog for a while. She did a stint on Sunday Brunch, so she's kind of a big deal. And Sarah's going to join us today to talk about mainstream media, getting into the mainstream press, how to handle it, what you can do to really grow awareness for your brewery, but on a bigger scale. So that's enough of me waxing lyrical. Let's all invite Sarah into the stage and give her a warm round of applause. A warm welcome. Here we go. Sarah.
I'll clap for myself.
Do it, make it happen, mate. You need the praise. I need like one of those fake applause buttons. That's
yes,
what I need to add.
absolutely, yeah.
How the gosh darn diddly do are you, buddy?
I'm super. Yeah, it's the weekend, isn't it? So yeah, all good here. Thank you. Fabulous.
Very nearly the weekend. Just a few more hours, and then we'll be there. But it's been a good week. It's been a good week. Well. 100%. Straight off, thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be a wicked chat. It's something that no guest has come on the show and talked about before. But I suppose, just in case people aren't familiar with yourself and what you've been doing for the past couple of years, in a blind date-esque fashion, what's your name and where'd you come from?
Yes, so I don't think I'm quite as world famous as you've given me credit for there, but I do appreciate it. So I'm Sarah. I worked for 12 years at BrewDog. I was the first marketing employee. I did all sorts of things at BrewDog. From PR was kind of the backbone of my career there, but doing lots of things from marketing and brand through to running our cider business, sustainability, and all of our crowdfunding as well. So a really sort of broad scope of what I did there, and obviously saw that incredible growth trajectory over the 12 years that I was there. Forward to that, I worked for a PR agency called Manifest, and since leaving BrewDog earlier this year, I'm now fractional CMO. I do brand strategy and go-to-market strategy for a range of different brands as well. And then I did do a stint on Sunday Brunch, so I did around 20 shows, presenting a range of different beers to celebrities on live Sunday morning TV, which was super fun and achieved a personal ambition from when I was a child, which was to be a TV presenter. It wasn't quite Blue Peter, which was my #1 goal, but close enough.
Oh, yeah, dude, I'd take Sunday Brunch any day.
Exactly.
Wicked show. Well, yeah, a nice varied career then ultimately leading up to where you are right now. And as I mentioned in the show intro, we're going to be talking about the mainstream press side of things, you know, how to really help breweries to leverage that and get the most out of it. And of course, it'd be wonderful to, you know, cast your memory back to the BrewDog days, the very early days, because at one point there was a time where no one knew who this BrewDog was and what they were up to. So do you remember, like, when you were there, some of the first pieces of mainstream coverage that BrewDog secured, and like, how did it happen?
So when I first started, so BrewDog was actually one of my clients when I worked in PR previously as well. And when I worked there, you know, some of the coverage that BrewDog was getting was for things like the end of history, which kind of old school beer nerds will be aware of, which is where BrewDog was packaging the strongest beer in the world in taxidermy stoats and squirrels, which were roadkill. They weren't voluntarily killed for the purposes of beer. But that got a huge amount of coverage and was really a way to raise awareness for craft beer, make people question how you can make a beer that strong, and actually do an educational piece and encourage people to get more interested in beer and kind of what the potential is within beer, because at the time it was very kind of lager focused. Craft beer wasn't really a thing, but also it was a shock tactic at the end of the day to create those column inches and get people actually talking about something that otherwise they wouldn't be that interested in. So the end of history was one of those big ones. We held the world's smallest protest with a guy who was a dwarf, and he was dressed as a punk with placards outside the Houses of Parliament. But the reason for that one was at the time you couldn't get schooners. So the only ways that the Weights and Measures Act basically meant you could only have pints and half pints. So BrewDog was actually championing the schooner or the 2/3, and actually successfully lobbied for that to be introduced. So obviously that's now a big thing in a lot of craft beer venues. So a lot of those early kind of shocking PR pieces, they really had that core message behind them. There was something really purposeful about it in terms of what BrewDog really wanted people to know, but it was doing it in a way that the only way really that it could do, because creating that much noise and excitement around the brand, you needed to do something that would create those headlines. So it was very splashy. It was very kind of controversial and, you know, seen as quite a bit of an upstart in the industry, but in a way that, you know, BrewDog wouldn't have been able to achieve those that press coverage, having just gone, we think you should be able to buy 2/3 of a pint, like nobody cares. Whereas actually doing something that was a bit more interesting and impactful created that conversation and got people talking.
And I suppose the schooner conversation, that's an interesting angle to take anyway, because it's not necessarily about the brewery, it's about the community and it's about the wider piece.
Yes.
How much work did BrewDog do in the background about, okay, so these are the things that we care about, these are the purposes, this is what we really want to champion, before then, I suppose, brainstorming, well, how do we make people aware of this?
Yeah, I think it's always the purpose and the intent first, and then building out the PR activity around that. So there's always something at the heart of it. For example, BrewDog needed to fundraise, so it turned to crowdfunding. But instead of just going, you can now invest in the business, they drove a tank outside the Bank of England to actually kind of make a statement around what they were doing. So it's always starting with, this is the message, this is the information that we need to convey, and then building out something that is newsworthy and engaging as a sort of a creative vehicle, no pun intended, to actually get people to talk about that, you know, relatively boring thing that you actually want to share with the world, but actually finding a creative way to kind of package it up and share it with the world.
And do you think that creative angle, the thinking outside the box, as cliche as that phrase is that the bit that elevates, that gets you to the mainstream coverage versus a traditional press release or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think so. I think having that, you know, it's now more than ever, there are fewer journalists and fewer publications as well. So it's much harder to get press coverage anyway. So really, you do need to have something that the journalists are going to want to write about, and that needs to be newsworthy. So it has to be new news, and it has to be something creative that's going to, you know, a lot of the time it's going to create clicks and people are going to be interested in it. So it is very different now in terms of the PR landscape and the role that social media plays versus what it was when I first started. But at the end of the day, having creativity as part of what you're doing, it means that you can do a lot more with a lot less, because creativity trumps budget at the end of the day. So you'll be able to achieve a lot more if you're doing something that's a bit more exciting and thinking outside of the box, rather than just doing something generic that actually most people don't care about.
And where would you suggest breweries look to get inspired for this kind of more creative approach? Because there's like branding 101 and marketing 101 and the normal things that you need to do, but even the idea of going, well, yeah, to crowdfund, we're going to drive a tank outside the bank, we're going to put, you know, a high percentage beer in roadkill. Those are not normal things that everyone thinks of. Like, where do you go for inspiration? Like, how can you get to that point?
Yeah, so I think the thing with BrewDog is it had an extremely strong kind of brand identity. So it had that punk aesthetic running through every single thing that it did. So it was very, for those people who were involved, it was very clear what was appropriate for BrewDog and what wasn't. So I think it's really important for any brand, regardless of what industry they're in, to really have a clear vision of what they stand for, their aesthetic, their sort of identity, and what they want to align themselves with externally. And that can be your kind of breeding ground for creativity, because that will give you the ideas of where you go to from there. So there are some incredible FMCG companies that are doing really, really good creative activations at the minute, but they're not, you know, they don't look exactly the way that BrewDog did. They're not doing it in the same way, but they're doing it in a way that is truly authentic to their own brand. So I think having a really strong clarity in your own mind and within your culture of your business of what you stand for and why you're there and what things you want to do in the world and what, you know, purpose you have, that will create the basis for any of those briefs when you come to saying, right, we've got a new product launch, how are we going to make a noise about this? So I think it needs to start with your brand integrity and then you can layer up from there essentially.
And I can imagine there'd be people listening going, well, you know, BrewDog had the punk rock, you know, the rebellious brand nature and tone. So it's quite easy to do something a bit brash and something that's going to make people look. But I'd imagine if you had a premium luxury brewery brand, there's still great ways to communicate. Like you can start with exploring the most expensive beer, for example, or you know, you do a really different pop-up kind of, you know, white table service kind of experience and things. So you don't have to be aggressive and brash, but you do have to be brand aligned.
You do. I think a really good example of another brewery that's done really splashy stuff is Lucky Saint. So they've opened the world's first zero alcohol pub, and that got a lot of attention. You know, they've done a lot of stuff with using quite sort of religious imagery in their advertising, and as much as advertising is probably out of the reach of most independent and small breweries, the visual identity of that is really strong. So it doesn't have that's worlds apart from BrewDog as well. So love Lucky Saint, but you know they've got a very different identity, but they're also very, very clear on what they stand for and how they're positioning themselves, and they're still managing to, you know, make a lot of noise around that. And I think that's true of lots of different breweries. They've got that identity and what makes them stand apart. It doesn't always have to be the punk thing. I think there's lots of other ways that you can approach it. And like you say, you could do collaborations, so you can partner with other brands that are really aligned to you. That's also a fantastic way to be able to then engage new audiences, because you can get beyond your own sphere into their sphere as well. Like you say, you can partner with restaurants and hospitality venues. That's obviously going to be great from a commercial standpoint as well, in terms of getting that getting those sales through, but also gets you into those environments and has that opportunity to create the engagement with the consumer as well. So there's tons of ways that you can approach it, but I think just making sure that you're consistent in terms of how you show up in the world means that you can then come across those kind of creative ideas as and when it's appropriate.
And when you were coming up with ideas with BrewDog, was it it must have been a collaborative environment?
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the power of like bouncing ideas back and forth and kind of adding a little bit of extra crazy or a little bit of like, yeah, let's just amp this up a little bit more is all got to be part of the process, I imagine.
Absolutely. There was a constant stream of prompts at BrewDog. So there was always like, what can we do about this? What can we do about this? Like there was always there was very much a culture of come up with ideas on the hoof. Everyone is welcome to come up with things, and we were always constrained by the fact that we didn't have a lot of money. So utilizing that to our advantage, that meant that we could be a bit more risky and a bit more out there in terms of how we approached things, was always super fun. So I do think that we were often given that brainstorming kind of opportunity to kind of come up with things, and we would do that in small groups, we would do that in large groups, we would do it async, you know, or though it was just constant, to be perfectly honest with you. Like there was always that was always ongoing.
And I'm just thinking back to being in various breweries and just listening to the kind of conversations that goes on back there anyway. Like half of that stuff they talk about is batshit crazy anyway. So I imagine if they had a notepad half the time, it'd be like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if? It's like, yeah, it would be, and it could work. Like make
so funny. So, you know, some of the brewers I worked with were some of the most introverted people. They did not want to be, you know, photographed for social media like that, but they were incredible, like artists of brewing. They were incredible people. But if you gave them the scope to say, right, what are we going to do about this, they would come up with really funny things. Like they were really, really creative and insightful. So it was always very entertaining to work directly with the brew team to come up with ideas for stuff, because they'd come to the table with stuff that a marketing person just wouldn't think of, because they're not in it all day, every day. So involving people who aren't naturally, you know, a part of the marketing process is such a great way to get a fresh perspective. You know, that was always really fun for me.
And did you do like much testing with these ideas, or was there a chance to test it really? Like when you go, well, we're going to get a tank, or you know, you can't do much testing. It's like it might work or it might not.
Well, we did the tank twice, to be fair. I don't know if we could have done it a third time, from a company called Tanks a Lot. which was worth it just for the pun alone. Yeah. So I don't know if testing is necessarily what you can do in PR necessarily. I think you just need to commit, and then, you know, face the consequences. If it goes south, then just be prepared to deal with that when it happens. I think now there is a slight more reliance in marketing generally on testing and data and insight. And a lot of the time with things like creative ideas, you have to have that gut instinct for what you're going to do. So it's tricky because a lot of people now expect you to be able to say, what's the ROAS of this concept like? And you just don't have that with, you know, PR. That's much more kind of brand awareness, top of funnel. It's much more difficult, it's much more intangible. But ultimately brands will not achieve greatness and get those creative ideas if they're looking for something that's got an ROI attached to it from the outset, because that's just not how it works.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So we've touched on the idea of generating these ideas and doing stuff that will get you noticed, but then let's talk about mainstream coverage. How would you define mainstream coverage versus the likes of like kind of traditional beer media that most breweries are going to be used to getting their name into?
Yeah, so it's national media essentially versus media that specializes in a niche like food and drink or beer or hospitality, for example. So I'm not suggesting by any means that mainstream media is more important, because actually you won't get to that until you start with the beer media. So one of the things that I did very early on at BrewDog and did continuously the whole time I was there was engaging beer media. So, you know, we used to invite beer writers to the brewery to come and brew a beer with us, and we would create, you know, a beer with their name attached to it. It meant that they created great content, they got behind the scenes, they got to talk to the brewers and the founders, and they had that opportunity to get kind of under the skin of the brand. And also from our perspective, it meant that we got to produce something that they would then help to market. And it meant that we got a lot of content from that as well that was super relevant to our community. So, you know, engaging with beer writers is always super important, and that's absolutely something that I would advocate for any brewery doing, because actually your mainstream coverage in terms of your beers is more likely to come from beer writers than just national news desks. So, for example, you know, the likes of Adrian Tierney Jones, Pete Brown, these are writers who have beats in the national media. So if you are building those relationships with those writers, sharing your beers with them, letting them know what you've got going on, then that's a great way to potentially get that initial mainstream coverage that then builds your awareness over time. So you can't necessarily expect to just suddenly appear in the Daily Mail, not that everyone would want that anyway. But if you did want to get that mainstream coverage in a national newspaper that has, it's a tabloid or a broadsheet traditionally, but mostly it's online that you're going to be looking at now, you will probably start off being able to kind of generate a bit more awareness for your brand via kind of reviews and stuff online.
That makes a lot of sense. And I was talking to Cargill just the other week about kind of like the basic PR stuff. That was dropping on the podcast next week, people, if you want to tune in for that. But with mainstream as well, is in my mind, I almost see that as being that's media coverage that finds you. You don't actively go out all the time in order to get it in there, because they pick up on the story and go, well, this is worth our time, worth our investment to promote. Am I getting that right, or is that wrong?
As in the more creative ideas, or as in your creative stuff? So to be perfectly honest with you, I have a PR background, so most of the stories that, you know, we did from BrewDog that we were actually aiming to get that coverage, we would do a press sell-in, and we would have the press release, we would have the assets, and it would be a curated package that we would then sell into media. By sell-in, there's no money attached. That's just what they call calling a journalist or sending an email and pitching it to them and telling them. So the vast majority of the coverage that we achieved was through a proactive sell-in to actually achieve that coverage. Having said that, sometimes things run away that you don't expect. So, for example, BrewDog introduced paternity leave or puppy leave, where if you got a new dog, adopted or purchased, then you got 5 days like holiday. So we announced that we were doing that, and genuinely for the next year, I would field press inquiries from around the world, literally Japan, Australia, all over the place, constantly asking me for more information about this incredible perk that this brewery in Scotland was offering people. So things like that they run away from you without you expecting them to necessarily be that big deal. So we had a cute picture of 2 dogs at the bar, and we had a press release. That's literally it. Then we had the offer through HR, which obviously was being implemented anyway. But the amount of people who thought that was just the best thing they'd ever heard of, and they wanted to write about it, making sure that we had those assets and the information and interviews lined up if people wanted them, meant that we could maximize the potential out of that one, which was actually one that we weren't expecting to get press coverage for to the scale that we did.
Well, I mean, who doesn't love a dog, right? You know,
exactly.
Puppy photo. It makes perfect
Yeah,
sense.
I had to borrow a dog to go on Sky News with that one, because I didn't have I've not had a dog of my own since I was a child. But Sky News wanted me to come on. They were like, "Can you bring a dog?" So I had to call up a good friend, Jamie Klinger, and said, "Can I please borrow your dog?" So she met me at the studio with her dog, and I took it on. Didn't have to. I never claimed that it was my dog. It was a prop dog, but McNulty was very helpful that day.
McNulty, what a name.
Yeah,
Love
I
it.
know. Yeah.
So how would breweries go about picking the right channels and like the right places in mainstream media that would work for their brand, and finding the people to get in touch with? Because it's got to be filled with hundreds and thousands of people. You need to know the right one.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely there are people that can help you with this. So you don't have to do it on your own. So, there are plenty of PR agencies, and there are plenty of PR freelancers as well. So I would recommend, especially for smaller breweries, looking at local community, and also your local media will be a great place to start building that relationship. So I definitely recommend local press coverage is an opportunity. So when you have like events and things, that's a great place to kind of make sure that you've built relationships, and also your local broadcast networks. So for example, around here, it's like Look North, like you would want to make sure that they're aware of you, so that when they have something come up that they want, a spokesperson from the brewing industry, you're on their radar. So it's making sure that you're just building those relationships. You're not always going to get the coverage, but making sure that you've, when you do have news, putting together a press release, making sure that you've shared that with them and that you've got the assets ready to go is super important. So you can take the view of getting a freelancer or getting an agency to kind of do that outreach for you, or you can try and do it off your own back. So, a lot of these news desks will have email addresses online that you can find quite easily, and you'll be able to just share the information with them. You could do something like the PA Media Newswire, where if you've got a big release, then you could send out a press release on that, which is I think it's about £450 for a release. So it's a bit more of an investment. So you've really got to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row, and that your press release is perfectly written and it's got all the hooks in it that you need before you go down that route. For the most part, it's a case of building those relationships with journalists that would be relevant to you, not just expecting this spray and pray, en masse from the beginning. So I think it's definitely relationship building, but start local and start small and start relevant. So start with the beer writers as well, and then build it from there.
I suppose the other benefit of starting small and local is that you're going to build up your own confidence around what you're doing, what you're putting out there, how to write things. So you've got that opportunity to tweak and evolve it before the big dogs come knocking at your door going, "Hey, do you want to feature on insert, big program here?"
Exactly. Yeah.
So Sunday Brunch, how did that all come about?
So I had a YouTube channel called Hot Topic, where I would do sub 3-minute reviews of beers, because at the time there were lots of great beer YouTubers, but my issue with them is that they were like half an hour long, and I really wanted short, snappy content. So I made these really short videos. I feel like I just preempted TikTok, let's be honest, and maybe I should resurrect Hot Topic for the TikTok age, perhaps, we'll see. But essentially I had my beer YouTube channel, and it was doing fine. It was just a hobby for me. And then I found out that Jamie Oliver was launching a new YouTube channel called Drinks Tube, and he was hosting auditions, and a couple of people that I knew were going through that audition. So I went and auditioned as well, and I was given a role on that. So I was presenting on his Drinks Tube channel, talking about beer in different kind of contexts, and that was super fun. And then on Sunday Brunch, Rebecca Seal, who was their drinks expert, she was going on maternity leave, so they were replacing her with a series of drinks experts, so like someone in rum, someone in cider, someone in beer. So I went ahead and auditioned for beer expert, and I was one of the first beer experts on Sunday Brunch after Rebecca Seal went on mat leave. So that was super fun. Like, I did like 20 shows. It was really, really enjoyable. And now, there's a number of other beer experts who do that slot. So Mark Dredge does it, Jacob Liddell does it. It's really cool. Like, I'm a big fan of Sunday Brunch, and the exposure that they give to sort of craft products as well, because it doesn't tend to be kind of just mainstream products on there. Saturday Kitchen does it as well now as well. So there is a lot more coverage for craft drinks on national television now than there used to be, and it's been really fun to sort of be part of that journey.
I love it. And I mean, that national television, that's got to be a big feather in the cap for an indie brewery to go, oh yeah, we've got a can of something or a bottle of something on there. Of course, we talked about, doing these stunts and these PR activities to gain general awareness of the brewery, but getting a product onto something like Sunday Brunch, Saturday Kitchen, that's a different kettle of fish. Like, what's the process that a brewery would have to go through to achieve that and get their bottles on TV?
Yeah, so from my perspective as a presenter, I would come up with a theme, and then I would do my research around what beers I would want to include within that theme. As someone who worked at BrewDog in terms of getting press coverage, I would look at the presenters and actually reach out to them and offer them samples. So I think it's both sides you have to be aware of. But I think it's super important. It's the same as that kind of relationship building with beer writers. Do it with broadcasters as well. So if you know that there is someone on, Sunday Brunch, Saturday Kitchen, This Morning, whatever, if you've seen them, you know who they are, look them up online, get in touch with them, offer them samples. They might not want them, so you can't be too pushy, but do offer them and just build that relationship. That's your way to get in. So make sure that you know what makes you stand apart, what products you want to put in front of them. Don't just give them the reign of everything because it's too much choice, but just get in touch with them and share the information that you want to share. And then when you do have new product launches, you can then reach out and be like, hey, just to let you know, we've got this launching. What did you think about the beers that we sent before, etc. So I think, you'll never know what necessarily is going to be featured, but it's a great way to be able to say, right, that person does feature beer, I better get in touch and just drop them an opportunity to sort of connect. So that would be the way I would approach that.
Nice. I suppose in the same way that you're trying to do something which is a little bit bolder than a normal press release, even engaging with a presenter, you don't just want to do the standard DM or something. You want to have a way to really hook them in, and even I'm thinking about, like, if they do agree to take a sample from you, like, don't just stick it in a brown box. You want to like constantly wow and impress to get, really stick in their mind, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to break the bank on it, and you don't have to spend forever on it. But I agree, like, putting something together that is a little bit prettier than just a brown box is often quite a nice way to land that kind of first impression. So have a think about what stands you apart and how you want to actually represent your brand when you share it. Maybe a little handwritten note is actually quite nice, just to sort of share a bit of information and just some connections as well. That's a nice way to show that you have kind of curated this sample package for that individual, rather than just sending a message to the warehouse and hoping that they send it to the right person. So yeah, agreed. It's a great idea in terms of building that relationship to make sure you're personalizing it a little bit.
So, like we talked about, kind of printed press, with television, there's radio, there's all these other mainstream channels, and there's so much that breweries could be reaching out to and investing time in it. But what's the litmus test? How do you advise breweries, like, going back, like, finding the right places for them to be in?
So I think it's probably spinning it around a little bit to say, what do you want to achieve? Because actually, if your focus is you actually want to get to the scale of, getting supermarket listings, then that's quite different. And you probably want to be focused on, publications like The Grocer, and actually more of your trade publications. That's probably more relevant to you. If you are keen to just grow locally, then absolutely your local media, that's much more important. If you are quite niche, then absolutely you need to be making sure that you're connecting with beer writers, beer influencers. There's plenty of beer influencers online as well, and they have massive value as well. So sharing, they'll be very, receptive to samples as well. So reaching out to them and giving them the opportunity to review your products is a great way to do that. So I think I would really start with, what is your goal? And then you can actually kind of map out, this is where we would actually benefit from having press coverage, and this is what will actually elevate our brand. So, if you want to engage more women potentially, then you might want to look at women's media and media that's tailored towards a female audience and speak to them and see if there's an opportunity to get your beers covered there. So I think there's lots of approaches to this, but start with why. Classic Simon Sinek. But actually look at why are you doing this press outreach, and therefore where should you approach first.
Mm-hmm. Solid advice. Wonderful. So we talked about the process of actually achieving, getting in the mainstream and the right places to be and what to talk about and how to do that. But beyond actually going, well, I'm going to be in the mainstream, there's got to be a lot of background thought of going, well, if this goes well, we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
Like, is there a checklist, or like what do breweries need to consider beyond the, hey, a few more people might recognize your brand from this point onwards?
Yeah. So I think in terms of stock, if you know that you've got coverage coming, it's very tricky and it is really unpredictable because you've never got guarantee that coverage is actually going to run. But I would suggest always making sure that you've got ample stock of anything you know is going to get coverage, but only stocking enough so that you'll sell through regardless before, you know, that product's going to go out of date. So perhaps it'll just take a longer period, but being prepared, but I wouldn't overstock. So I think, you know, if you've got the option, then perhaps implementing notify me when back in stock for your e-com, if that is a route for sales for you, so that if you do sell out, you've still got that opportunity to data capture, and then you can potentially reach out to those people in future if you do have to sell out. You can notify your biggest customers as well in terms of retailers and make sure that they're aware of the coverage, which ensures that they'll be fully stocked, and then you can direct customers in that direction if you do happen to sell out online. And it will also help those customers feel the benefit of the coverage too, and it's like you've considered them in that process too. So from a commercial standpoint, it's great to be able to do that. And then even post coverage, you know, from your broader customer set in terms of retailers, just sharing it with them is quite a nice way to just build that relationship and make sure that they're aware of what marketing you are actually undertaking.
I suppose it works the same for your internal team as well. Like my mind thinks back to, I know a chap called Tubby Tom, and he was on Sunday Brunch. He did a demo with his rubs and sauces, and the first time he was on Sunday Brunch, like sales went through the roof on this website.
Yeah.
He was still in London, and his team were like, "No, we got to come in at the weekend." Like it was the biggest sales they'd had like for the whole year combined. So your internal team, especially if you're a small brewery, you got to be like, guys, just be aware, on the off chance, things could get a little bit crazy for the next 7 days or something.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. I think making sure your team is aware is super important. And I think that goes for everything, just keeping everyone around the table. So, you know, if you do have those opportunities, making your sales team aware so that then they can utilize it if it's good coverage, making your ops team aware, making your warehouse aware, just not like blindsiding them with this. If you know it's coming up, is super important, and it just keeps people on side as well, and it will keep them motivated as well if they think, oh, this is fantastic, we're going to make the most out of this. You know, it's quite a fun thing to kind of all get behind for sure.
And I would have thought like securing the first bit of mainstream coverage is going to be the hardest, but then you can use that as like a proof of, you know,
you can, yes. So I think there are two sides to that slightly, which is, one of them is you might find that you don't get covered again by the same place in, you know, after you've just been covered. So for example, Sunday Brunch will not show the same brewery multiple times in a row because they don't want to, you know, look like they're sort of favoring anyone. But at the same time, you know, it does mean that if you've been covered on one network, then you might have an opportunity to get seen on others as well. And it just looks good for your brand as well if you've sort of had that, you know, like you say, it is a proof that you are a legitimate business and that you are getting attention. So it can kind of be a bit self-fulfilling, yeah.
So we talked about obviously that what can go really right with, you know, press and attention, and you need to sell more, you need to have it all there, but we should acknowledge the other side where you can get negative press or it just doesn't go as well. Like, what are your hints and tips for breweries who have had, you know, a bit of negative feedback, or, you know, it didn't go the way they wanted it to ultimately?
Absolutely. So I think if it's really, really bad, you just need to own it and deal with that up front. I think, you know, discuss that, if you're in a situation where it's a review situation, then if you are face to face with customers, discussing the merits and the positives and inviting discussion and actually being open to the feedback will come across much more positively than kind of rejecting the feedback. So I think that's a nice way to approach it if it is kind of in person, or if you're a guest on something, for example, and someone says they don't actually like your product. And I would say ultimately just move on, because ultimately it will happen. Sometimes you might get some negative press coverage. I've done interviews where I literally made, I did Sunday Brunch once, and Catherine Jenkins was almost sick on live TV. But the brewery, I can't even remember which brewery it was that she was kind of not enjoying, but she was super nice about it. And I didn't even realise this until the Daily Mail ran an article saying that she was nearly sick on live TV. So that happened, but it wasn't like it didn't ruin my TV career. Like, that's not how it sort of went down. Like, these things happen. Not everyone will like beer. Everyone knows that, beer can be quite polarizing. Some people won't enjoy it. So you've just got to roll with the punches and just accept that sometimes that will happen and just move on. So yeah, these things will happen. Your audience will be unpredictable. You just need to grow a thick skin and take learnings and move on to the next opportunity.
I suppose depending on the type of brand that your brewery is, you may be able to leverage the negative, oh, we almost made someone sick. Then there's something fun that could come out of that, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Not any means.
100%. One of the most fun things BrewDog did was take the worst reviews of its bars and put them on the staff t-shirt. So the best one that everyone wanted was "This is just a shit hipster Weatherspoons" on the back of the staff t-shirts. So it was just taking those, reviews that were actually quite tongue-in-cheek and quite humorous, and just putting them on the t-shirts for the staff, and the staff loved it. They thought it was really funny. So it was really turning that negative coverage into a positive. So yeah, absolutely, there's always ways to maximize those mentions.
And what about, like, to really maximize the positive? Let's come back to the positive side of things. So you've been on Sunday Brunch, or you've had high level press review. You obviously mentioned you've got to make your internal team aware, the sales team need to be aware, but what would you be encouraging breweries to do? Is like, well, you've got this coverage, now you really got to maximize it by doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so I would definitely take quotes from it and share those. You can kind of use captions from, if you've been called the best peach cut pale or whatever and by the Guardian, you can kind of put that on your website and have that as a call out. It's a really nice way to show a bit of the fact that you have actually been covered in traditional media. It's a great way to do that. You can share it on your socials. If you do paid, you might be able to kind of share quotes from that as well. Just be careful that you're not actually screenshotting the actual coverage, but just sharing kind of references to what the reviews say. Engaging with the journalists after good press coverage is a really good shout. So that just helps to continue to build that relationship and just say, amazing, great coverage. Like, let me know if you want to come for a beer, if you want to visit the tap room, let me send you some more beers or whatever. They might not want it, but it's a nice way to just re-engage and build that relationship over time, nurture it, and don't take the coverage for granted. And then also just taking, if you've got really strong coverage, or if you've been like mentioned in like top 10 lists or whatever, then you could potentially even move it across to your pump clips or packaging if it's like amazing coverage that you really want to shout about. So I think there's lots of ways to just integrate it into sort of like the everyday touch points of your brand, but just making sure that you're sharing it as soon as it appears is probably the primary one, I would say. And for Sunday Brunch, for example, they always share photos of their drinks section on Instagram on the day, so you'll be able to then share that content as well, because then it's coming authentically from their profile.
Amazing. Yeah, just get it everywhere, right?
Make the most of it. Don't be shy.
Well, I suppose actually that's a really valid point, because some of the brewers I've met, it could be trying their worst nightmare, the idea of going, oh my lord, like, it's going to get a lot of attention, a lot of awareness, which is quite possibly the wrong way to think about it if you want to grow your brewery brand naturally. But for those brewers like who are going, it just doesn't feel accessible, it doesn't feel like something that I could achieve, like, what would your parting words of wisdom be, to get them on the path to mainstream coverage?
I think there is, if you believe in your product, then there is an opportunity to get coverage for it, that you just need to find the right outlet for it. And beer coverage it's not just like a linear thing, like it's always happening. There's always different people who are going to be covering that. So there's always opportunities. If your beer is crap, then maybe steer away from media, but that's probably, we've got bigger problems than PR. So I would say if you've got great products, just get it into the right hands and build those relationships, and that's where you'll get those opportunities.
Beautiful. Well, Sarah, this has been great, mate. Like another wonderful kind of masterclass in, coming up with the ideas, where to go, how to do it, and how to manage it step by step by step. I love these shows when it happens like that, because people can take it and just put it into place. It's wonderful. If people wanted to talk to you more and pick your brains more, and they were like, oh, you said that was really interesting, I'd love to know more, like how can people follow along and contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn probably more than I should be, so you can reach me there. I'm just find me. I'm just Sarah Warman. I'm very searchable, and I think I'm tagged in this very window as well, so I'm very accessible here in the live as well.
Wonderful stuff. Okay, LinkedIn it is. Sarah, thank you so much, mate. I really enjoyed this chat, and I hope everyone who's listening has enjoyed it as well.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And everyone who's tuned in, as always, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed the chat. I hope you've taken something valuable away from it. Until next time, people, rock on. Peace. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Branding for Breweries. If you got something great from it, hit follow, like, and subscribe on your favorite streaming app. Or even better, leave a review, share it with your brewery pals, or get in touch, because I want to chat to you. Rock on!